I was always told that money isn't everything, but it's so easy to forget that when your husband is one of the most successful CEOs in the world, and you find yourself sitting at a table with people who once mocked him, dismissed him as a poor immigrant, and are now invading his personal space, asking for autographs and advice. At that moment, I realized that all of them were the same people who had denied us support when we needed it most. But what happens when everything they've been chasing suddenly slips away? My name is Rosangela Ricci, and I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, as they say, though I didn't realize it right away. In childhood, everything seemed ordinary to me. Like most kids my age, I had my own room filled with stuffed animals, caring parents, and an older brother with whom I habitually competed for attention and affection. But as I grew older, I began to understand that my seemingly ordinary childhood was anything but. When you grow up wealthy, you think everyone lives the same way you do. The world appears to be a place without problems or hardships. Everything you need is always within reach, and your wants and desires are merely a matter of convenience and choice. Our family owned the largest chain of pharmacies in the state. Ricci Pharmaceuticals wasn't just a business, it was my grandfather's legacy. He was the one who built it from scratch, and for a time, everything I knew about the world was tied to that name. Despite his stern appearance and habit of working late into the night, my grandfather was a man with an unshakable belief in success, a man who passed on his passion for the business to my father. My father, David Ricci, inherited the family business when I was still a child. I vividly remember him coming home from work, his suit impeccable, his manners refined. His expensive tie was always slightly loosened around his neck, and his eyes shone with the fire of a winner. He never rested on his laurels. Even during dinner, when our family gathered together, he couldn't put work aside. "Another record-breaking quarter," he would say, swirling his wine glass with his finger. As always, profits are higher than last year. My mother, Malvolia, sat beside him, nodding approvingly as she adjusted her pearl necklace, its flawless luster perfectly complementing her polished demeanor. I never heard her criticize my father for his constant preoccupation with work. It was simply understood. My mother always told me that the business was something I should pass on to my children. While I did take part in the company's operations, I couldn't say I shared their enthusiasm. My older brother Amerigo, on the other hand, had lost interest in childhood games by the age of 12, drawn instead to archaeology. He tried to tell me about ancient civilizations and excavations, but as a child playing with dolls, I could hardly grasp his passion. "You just don't understand, Rosangela," he would often say, climbing the stairs with a stack of books. "You're busy with dolls, while I'm studying humanity's past." I, however, was always more practical. While I was drawn to more feminine pursuits, I gradually realized that it was far more important to my father that I become part of his business. I enjoyed helping out at the pharmacies. I quickly memorized the names and preferences of our regular customers. By the time I was 14, I could recite our entire inventory as if reading music. My father, noticing how seamlessly I navigated this world, often praised me. "That's my girl," he would say, and I felt proud of his recognition. He always expected more from me. I remember one dinner when he said, "One day, this will all be yours." And I liked it. I liked the idea of being the one to carry on the family legacy. In those moments, I felt like part of something greater than just being David Ricci's daughter. It was a world of success, a world where everything followed the rules, where every detail had its place. Amerigo, however, became increasingly absorbed in history and archaeology. His ambition to become a scholar never inspired much admiration in me. I couldn't understand how anyone could prefer dusty books and ancient excavations over running a profitable business. When he eventually announced that he planned to study archaeology in college, the house fell into a tense silence. We were dining in the formal dining room beneath a crystal chandelier worth more than most houses. That dinner is forever etched in my memory. My father was livid when Amerigo declared his intent to become an archaeologist. "Are you planning to spend your life digging in the dirt?" he erupted. His fork clattered against the porcelain plate, and I could feel the tension in the room as if it were a tangible force. My mother, who always strove to maintain harmony, pursed her lips, though her eyes betrayed her agreement with my father. Amerigo seemed unfazed. He calmly replied, "I've already been accepted into the program. Professor Anderson says I have real potential." Despite my father's continued outburst, Amerigo remained firm. Rising from the table, he added, "Then I won't be involved in the business." It was a moment that changed everything. From that moment on, all of my father's attention and expectations shifted to me. I was no longer just the backup plan. I was the future of Ricci Pharmaceuticals. The pressure was intense, but I enjoyed it, or at least I thought I did. My father's expectations were now fixed on me, and I felt the weight of every glance, every word, as though all his efforts were focused on shaping me into the ideal successor, a woman capable of continuing the family business that meant so much to him. At the same time, I began to see this not just as my duty but as a privilege. I could become the person he wanted me to be. And as I embarked on that path, with no doubts or second thoughts, college became my new world. College was everything I had dreamed of: prestigious, competitive, and full of trust fund kids like me. We were all so similar, yet there was something captivating about that similarity, as if we all belonged to an exclusive club where it mattered less what you could do and more what you already had. My designer clothes and platinum credit card, symbols of my status, became integral parts of the image I crafted for those around me. Everything in college was about success, about striving not just to learn but to ensure that your name would be remembered. It was then that I met Vincenzo. It happened in the campus library. Of all places I could have been, that's where I was, struggling with a coding assignment and battling a relentless stream of errors I couldn't fix. I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, muttering curses under my breath and desperately trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. Then, suddenly, I noticed him. He was sitting at the table next to mine, his attentive brown eyes fixed on my endless typing frustration. And then he spoke. "Do you need help?" he asked, sliding onto the chair beside me. His accent was barely noticeable, his eyes remarkably kind. There was something in his gaze that made me feel at home. He was brilliant. He had a full scholarship to study computer science and was at the top of his class. Professors often used his projects as examples, and students practically fought to work with him in group assignments. Despite his popularity, he remained humble, almost shy. It took 3 coffee sessions before I gathered the courage to ask him about his past. When he told me his parents had immigrated from Syria when he was a child, that his father worked as a security guard and his mother cleaned houses, I was stunned. Vincenzo spoke about it without a trace of self-pity. He explained how he had taught himself programming on an old laptop starting at the age of 12 and had taken on freelance gigs to help his family financially. I realized I had never encountered anything like it. I had never had to worry about bills or the future. My parents handled all of that for me. It was a privilege, but one that now felt foreign. A month later, we started dating. Vincenzo was different from all the wealthy boys I had grown up around. He didn't open doors for me because of outdated lessons in etiquette. He did it simply because he was genuinely polite and kind. When we went out, it was to small family-run restaurants rather than flashy places with city views. The food at those places was incredible, authentic, unpretentious, just like Vincenzo himself. The restaurant owners knew him by name, which said a lot about the kind of person he was. 6 months passed, and one day, Vincenzo proposed to me. It wasn't a grand, show-stopping moment with a giant diamond, as I might have expected from someone in my world. He gave me a simple silver ring he had saved up for himself, with no pretense or show. The ring was perfect, it was sincere, just like Vincenzo, and I couldn't help but feel my love for him deepen. My father was thrilled when I told him I was engaged. He immediately planned a large family dinner to meet my fiancée, inviting all of our relatives. I could almost hear him envisioning how our family business would expand with Vincenzo as part of the family. He likely assumed that Vincenzo was just the sort of man who could strengthen the company and make it even more successful. But the moment we stepped into our grand dining room, I realized my assumptions had been wrong. I saw the expressions on my relatives' faces change. At first, they wore broad, satisfied smiles, but those quickly faded into tense, barely concealed smirks. My Aunt Patricia clutched her pearl rings, and my mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. The silence was deafening until my father cleared his throat, a sound that echoed like a gunshot through the massive dining room. I felt Vincenzo's hand tense under the table, and at that moment, it became clear that not everyone in my family accepted him as I did. "So, young man," my father began, his voice harsh and condescending, the same tone he used with his employees. "Tell us about your background. Where are you from?" Vincenzo straightened, maintaining his dignity despite the hostility that filled the room. My father's words sliced through the air, their sharpness like steel needles that made my heart sink. I sat there, holding my breath, unable to believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the father I knew, the man who had taught me resilience and determination in business, who had always been proud of my ambition and drive for success. But now I saw only a cold, ruthless man willing to destroy everything I had built to preserve his idea of how things should be, to protect his pride. Vincenzo didn't flinch. He didn't respond immediately, but I could see a subtle change in his expression. He wasn't the kind of person to back down in the face of harsh words or authority. He hadn't been raised in a world where money and status dictated everything. His calmness, the very quality I admired in him, now turned into unbearable tension. I felt trapped, unable to find the words to defend him. "Rosangela, are you listening?" My father's voice was tight but furious. He turned his gaze on me, and I had never seen him like this, so resolute, so convincing in his disdain. "This isn't your life, your world. He doesn't belong here. You're too good for him, for all of this." My mother said nothing. She only glanced back and forth between us, and I could feel her discomfort, the same emotions that filled my father, but she didn't dare to speak, didn't dare to intervene. She had always supported him, even when his methods were harsh, even when he pushed me too hard. But now, when it came to Vincenzo, her silence was deafening. I looked at Vincenzo, searching his eyes for any sign of unease, any response that might give me the strength to act, but he just stood there like a statue, his expression respectful yet unwavering. He didn't argue, he didn't shout, and he didn't defend himself. He simply existed. Perhaps that was his greatness, his strength. Yet, at that moment, I wanted him to fight back, to bare his teeth and stand up to my parents. I was ready for it. I was ready to stand by his side, even if it meant losing them. Instead, I felt him lean slightly forward, his voice softer but no less confident. "I respect your family, Mr. Ricci, and I understand why you say these things," Vincenzo began, his accent barely perceptible but his sincerity and strength unmistakable. "But I assure you, I am not seeking your approval, nor do I desire your favor. I want only one thing, for Rosangela to be happy. And if proving my worth is necessary for that, I am willing to do it. I will never betray her, never let her down." My eyes instantly filled with tears. I knew that these words, so simple yet so powerful, were exactly what I had always been searching for. Vincenzo didn't need my family, didn't strive to win my parents' favor. He only wanted to be with me, to support me, and to make me happy. It was more than I could have ever hoped for. But my father couldn't see that. He refused to understand. "I will never allow you to take my daughter into your world," my father's words struck like lightning. "You are a pauper, a fraud. You don't know what family means. You don't know what true dignity is." That was the moment something broke inside me. I could no longer sit silently, could no longer allow this to go on. My hands clenched into fists, and I stood, as though breaking free from a nightmare. "Father," my voice was firmer than it had ever been, "I am no longer a child afraid of your words. I love Vincenzo, and I choose him over your money, your ambitions, and your pride. If you can't understand that, then you don't understand me." The silence in the room was almost tangible. My family, who had always been my support, now felt distant and foreign. But I didn't care. In that moment, there was no turning back. I couldn't be the person they had tried to shape, someone dependent on their approval. I was a woman capable of building my own life. And in that life, there was only one person who deserved my heart, and that was Vincenzo. It wasn't long after that, but I could feel how that moment, when I turned and left the house, became something defining. It wasn't just a break with my family, it was like escaping the chains that had held me for far too long. Every word they spoke, every look, every shadow of judgment that loomed over us like a dark cloud, all of it became part of the past. I left them there, amid their arrogance and prejudice, their desires and expectations of how I should live. But I couldn't. I couldn't be the Rosangela who feared judgment, who conformed to their standards just to earn their approval. It was impossible. So Vincenzo and I walked down the street, our hands tightly clasped, as though that simple gesture could help me forget how much it hurt to see my own parents so disconnected from reality, so incapable of understanding me. Vincenzo said nothing, and I felt his calmness sustain me. He didn't try to persuade me, didn't try to comfort me with words. He was just there, and that was enough. All I needed in that moment was his presence, his unwavering certainty that we were together. Our modest apartment became a refuge from the world. We lived as best we could, with no excesses, but having everything we needed, each other, our love, and a shared purpose. It was our little universe, and it felt infinitely beautiful. At first, I feared we wouldn't make it, that it would be too difficult. But with each passing day, it became clearer, what I had built, what we had built together, was real and valuable. And it was worth far more than all the money and status my family could offer. Vincenzo and I were happy, and that was enough. But my family didn't forget so easily. They couldn't accept my choice. And although time passed, and Vincenzo and I continued moving forward in our new, smaller world, the echoes of their voices still haunted me. Their words continued to resonate in my mind like an echo, sapping my confidence, draining my strength. When Vincenzo proposed that we get married, I didn't hesitate. I didn't waver for a second, even though the echoes of their words, their accusations, still lingered in my head. I sat down at my computer and began crafting the perfect wedding announcement. It wasn't just a post. It was my response to everyone who had doubted me, to those who had tried to impose their will on me. I created the perfect picture of love, breaking through the boundaries they had tried to set for me. The photo of Vincenzo and me, our hands intertwined, our faces lit with the kind of smiles that could soften even the hardest hearts, accompanied my message. I wrote that love knows no barriers, that it cannot be measured by social status, wealth, or origin. My love for Vincenzo was real, and its strength far surpassed all the conventions that had tried to confine me. Responses started pouring in almost immediately, just as I had anticipated. My cousin Rebecca, as always, was the first to express her disdain openly. "How could you, Rosangela? You've changed so much. You must not realize who you've gotten involved with." She didn't stop there, continuing to remind me that I had forgotten my roots and sold myself out. Each message was sharp, every word like a knife to the heart. And then, among the flood of messages, came another one from Aunt Patricia. "You've disappointed us. You'll never understand true happiness until you come back to us, to your real family." It wasn't just condemnation, it was their attempt to pull me back into their world, a world where I was expected to remain a little girl, obedient to their rules, told how to live, what to do, and whom to be with. My entire family believed this. Their logic was simple. Without them, I couldn't build a life, I couldn't find real happiness. Uncle George was no less persistent, sending message after message, as though genuinely distraught over what he saw as my mistake. He had warned me before to be careful with people like Vincenzo. He had always feared that his opinion was the only correct one and believed that as long as I followed his advice, I would be safe. He thought it was crucial to ensure I didn't make a misstep. But I had already realized that his world was foreign to me, and I couldn't live within those confines any longer. The torrent of messages was overwhelming and painful, but I no longer felt afraid. I simply couldn't believe their words. I saw their hypocrisy, their arrogance. What infuriated me the most wasn't their judgment, but their attempts to force me to return. It became clear to me that they didn't accept me, Rosangela, for who I truly was, but only the version of me they had constructed in their minds. I felt my blood boil. Every word they wrote was a blow, every action a new way to belittle us, our choices, our life, our love. Vincenzo, sitting beside me, calmly held my hand, but I noticed how his fingers turned slightly white from tension. He didn't engage in their verbal battles, didn't try to convince them otherwise. He simply sat there, and in his silence, there was something far more formidable than loud arguments. He was ready to defend me, he always was. But his silence, unlike my simmering anger, stirred a deep anxiety in me. I struggled to keep my hands from trembling as I watched their faces, their reactions, the way they continued to sow discord without hesitation. These people, whom I had once called my family, now felt like strangers to me. Their cruelty, veiled under a mask of refinement, left no doubt they would never accept us, never understand the love Vincenzo and I had built, a love that was valuable in and of itself, beyond their lofty standards. "Well, Vincenzo, what do you have to say?" Uncle George broke the silence again, his mocking tone unrelenting. "Surely, you found a job among all your virtual money, or are you still dreaming of a real business?" My hand curled into a fist as the tension mounted. I knew he wouldn't relent, that none of them would, that they would continue to mock, reprimand, and try to prove we were a mistake, that I had made the wrong choice. But what did they know of what we had endured? How could they judge what they had never seen or understood? "David, enough," my mother exclaimed, leaning forward. But her expression wasn't one of support for me. No, she was simply trying to smooth over the awkwardness, to fill the silence in the conversation. She wasn't defending me. She wasn't trying to understand. And I knew this was the final straw. I couldn't be part of this any longer. These people, everyone sitting at that table, would never accept us, never see anything real or significant in us. I glanced at Vincenzo, at his calm yet tense face, and felt the bitterness in my chest grow stronger. I could no longer hide my pain, no longer pretend that all these slights and insults didn't matter. I stood up from the table abruptly, unexpectedly, and Vincenzo's gaze immediately met mine. He stood too. We didn't exchange a single word or gesture, but in his eyes, I saw everything I needed: understanding, support, readiness. That was enough. "Let's leave," I said, my voice barely audible, almost a whisper, yet it carried something that made everything around us freeze. We left. We walked through the room without looking back. No words, no looks could make me return. I was no longer the Rosangela they knew, and they knew it. I didn't belong to them anymore. In that moment, I felt my heart find peace. Walking away, I finally felt like I could be myself, like I could be part of something different, something real and infinitely more important than the expectations they had imposed on me. Vincenzo was by my side. His support. His love. That was enough. Days passed, and when I returned home, I knew that deciding how to live my life was up to me. Vincenzo was my choice, my ally, my partner. Together, we had created this little world that shielded us from those who had tried to break us. And I knew that despite all the jabs, despite all the obstacles, I had made the right choice. With him, without them, we were happy. We were building our life. We were creating our future. You know, nothing was more painful than the words they hurled at me. But now I understood one thing: they were not part of my journey. They could not be part of my life. And no matter what they said, no matter what they thought, it didn't matter. We were free, and that was worth everything we had left behind. When Vincenzo and I returned to our small world, I felt that nothing and no one could tear us apart. We had our love, our home, our life. We were moving forward, and nothing, not even their cruel attacks, could stop us. That evening, when my father condemned my choice and loudly declared my exclusion from his life, I felt as though not just a single branch, but the entire tree I had grown on had been severed. It wasn't just a break with my family, it was a blow that awakened something primal, fierce, and liberating within me. I didn't return to the table. I stood up, unable to bear the humiliation, and held Vincenzo's hand tightly. He, of course, didn't say a word, but his eyes, filled with unyielding determination and love, were all the comfort I needed. As we left that house, I felt with every step, with every moment, that we were moving further away from the past, from those people who had become strangers. They no longer held any power over us, no longer had the ability to shape our future. We were free, and that was what mattered most. When Vincenzo and I returned home, I couldn't help but notice how much easier it was to breathe now, how the air in our home seemed lighter, purer, as though all the burdens of those years had been left behind. Yes, we were cut off from everything I had once considered part of my life, but now this was our world, our path. Years passed. We continued to build our life, but now on our own terms. Vincenzo, with his incredible knack for strategy and innovation, gradually began to make his mark in the tech world. We started a company that soon became known not only in Italy but beyond. Vincenzo wasn't just building a business, he was creating something that could change the world. His cryptocurrency investments, which had once been mocked by those who consider themselves smarter, were only the beginning. We used that capital to launch an entirely new company. Tech Vision Enterprises began developing innovative AI-driven solutions for businesses. I remember those nights in our small office, discussing the future, planning how to capture the market, how to revolutionize an industry. And then, 3 years later, we achieved what once seemed impossible. The company's valuation exceeded $500 million, and we were invited to international conferences we had once only dreamed of attending. We became pioneers in a new era of technology, and every day, every step in the process, reinforced my belief that we had made the right choice. But it wasn't just about money, business, or recognition. What mattered most was how we had walked this path together, side by side. We were no longer dependent on others' opinions or external validation. We had become people who didn't need to earn respect. It had become a part of who we were. Looking back at that evening when my father cast me out, I realized I couldn't regret anything. Not what I had lost, not what I had left behind. Nothing that had happened in the Ricci house could compare to what Vincenzo and I had built together. We hadn't sought support from those who might have understood us, because we had found each other. That was our strength. At that moment, I realized that our life together wasn't just a success story, it was so much more. It was a story of fighting for oneself, for one's ideals, and for one's love. Every step on that journey was important. Every obstacle we overcame made us stronger, wiser, and more confident. We never went back to that house. I never returned to those people who had left me behind. I didn't need their approval or admiration. My family now consisted of those who were willing to share in everything I had. Vincenzo was not just my husband but also my best friend, my support, and my steadfast companion on this journey. The outside world was full of opinions and judgments, but within our circle, we created our own world, our own reality, where what mattered wasn't brands, money, or inheritance but what we could build together. At some point, I realized that true strength lies in not being tied to the past, to what you were born into. Strength is in being able to create your future, to build it with those who value you for who you are, not where you came from. We continued to grow our business, expanding our horizons. Vincenzo not only became a leader in the tech market but also inspired others to embrace change. He was a true revolutionary in his field, and I was proud to stand by his side, to watch him transform the world. Yet, despite all the external successes, I knew this was only a part of our journey. The most important thing was that we had started this journey together, with a blank slate, and nothing was more valuable than the moment we truly became free. And so, we kept moving forward, despite the challenges. Because I knew that with every passing day, with every new achievement, we weren't just becoming more successful, we were becoming more ourselves. I watched with pride as my husband's name became increasingly recognized. Articles, interviews, headlines, they filled the pages of business magazines, and his name frequently appeared among the most respected figures in technology. He received numerous accolades, including titles like Tech Visionary of the Year, CEO Under 30, and Most Innovative Entrepreneur. Each time I heard of another achievement, I was overwhelmed with pride. But what I was proudest of was that success hadn't changed him. He remained the same person he had always been, kind, humble, and genuine. Even though he now wore expensive clothing, his style remained modest and understated. He didn't need to show off. Even when he had the opportunity to spend large sums on luxury items, he preferred to wear what was simple and tasteful, reflecting his inner strength and character. He still opened doors and greeted everyone as an equal. The people he worked with often commented on how he still remembered the names of every employee, even as the company expanded and became increasingly renowned. I couldn't stop thinking about my father. There was a part of me that wanted to find him, to show him all the headlines, all the achievements, to prove how wrong he had been, how he had missed what truly mattered. But unfortunately, we hadn't spoken since that dreadful birthday when he declared that I was no longer his daughter. I had spent a long time trying to understand what that moment meant, but in truth, I found peace and calm in the silence, in the absence of that constant struggle for attention and approval. Life moved forward, and there was no sense in reopening old wounds. One day, an invitation arrived. A cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Rebecca Ricci. I sat staring at the envelope, confused and slightly annoyed. This was the same cousin who had once mocked us, whose cutting comments about Vincenzo's modest background and our clothing still echoed in my mind. And now, he was inviting us to his daughter's wedding. Strangely enough, it didn't even surprise me. Vincenzo and I had been through so much that these family games no longer held any weight for us. I handed the invitation to Vincenzo, who read it carefully. Then, looking at me with those kind eyes I had fallen in love with so many years ago, he said, "Maybe it's part of my culture. We believe that family is sacred, even when it causes us pain. Maybe we should go. After all, they are still your family." We decided to go. It felt like stepping back into the past, into a world we had left long ago, but one that apparently still thought it had a claim on us, unaware that our hearts no longer had room for them. The evening unfolded at the Ritz-Carlton. We entered the grand ballroom where Rebecca's wedding ceremony was held. From the very beginning, the reaction was unexpected. Someone exclaimed loudly, "Oh my God, it's Zahn Hassan, the CEO of Tech Vision. Did you see him? He's the guy who just closed the deal with Microsoft." Suddenly, all eyes were on us. People began approaching Vincenzo, asking for investment advice, begging for photos, handing him their business cards. The very same relatives who once looked down on my husband now scrambled for his attention. It was so absurd that I struggled to suppress a smirk. I watched as Vincenzo handled it all with poise and grace. He was impeccably polite, smiling for photos, answering questions, and ensuring no one felt left out. He was kind and respectful, even though I knew many of the people vying for his favor now had never shown him the same courtesy in the past. Amid the parade of fake smiles and grandiose words, I spotted my Aunt Patricia. The same woman who had once openly ridiculed Vincenzo's table manners and now approached us with enthusiasm, gushing, "Your husband is simply magnificent. Did you know Forbes wrote about him?" I laughed to myself, marveling at how strange and unpredictable life could be. The man they once dismissed as insignificant now stood on a pedestal, his name among the most prominent in the entrepreneurial world. He had built a fortune greater than anything the Riccis could have imagined. Yet, unlike them, he remained modest, kind, and humble. And then my gaze fell on my parents. They were standing in line to approach our table. My mother wore her most ingratiating smile, the one she usually reserved for wealthy investors, while my father, with a businesslike grin pasted on his face, came up to me and said, "Darling, Mom and I follow your incredible success in the news. We're so proud to call you family." In that moment, I felt the full weight of realization. Everything they had done and said back then no longer mattered. Vincenzo and I had built a life that couldn't be fabricated or replicated. We didn't need their recognition. I couldn't help but smile bitterly, because to my family, I would always be the poor immigrant girl. That perception had never changed. No matter how the world around us evolved, their view of me remained static. I remembered that evening years ago, sitting at a family dinner, when they flinched at the mention of my name, at the thought of me marrying Vincenzo. They recovered quickly, of course. My father even cleared his throat and loosened his collar, a collar I now noticed wasn't from his usual luxury brand. It was subtle, but it told me everything I needed to know. Time had moved on, and the bridges between us had long since burned. We were no longer the family they once thought we were. As the evening progressed, the true nature of the situation came to light. Over hors d'oeuvres, the story spilled out. Michael, their golden child, the son they had cherished and groomed, had signed contracts with dubious suppliers to cut costs on pharmaceuticals for the family company. The result was disastrous: counterfeit medications, customer complaints, lawsuits, and FDA investigations. My father lowered his gaze, admitting that their banks remained untouched, but the stakes were real, millions were on the line. My mother, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, tightened her lips as my father reached across the table to place a hand on Vincenzo's shoulder. I watched as my husband, with empathy but without a hint of condescension, listened. Vincenzo never turned away someone in need. But I knew it wouldn't be here, not in this setting. He simply said, "Family helps family, doesn't it?" His voice was soft, but it carried the inner resolve I had heard many times before and never stopped marveling at. I, however, remained silent. The smile on my face was no longer genuine. Family helps family? I echoed, the words directed more at myself than at them. I seem to recall you saying we weren't family anymore. You disowned me, twice, didn't you? My voice was cold, barely audible above the general noise of the reception, where the DJ was asking everyone to raise their glasses to the newlyweds. That was the moment I realized I couldn't, and wouldn't, play by their rules. I wasn't going to offer my kindness and forgiveness to their world again. My father jumped to his feet, his face red with anger, and shouted, "How dare you? After everything I've done for you, how can you be so ungrateful?" But his outburst didn't shake me. I stood calmly, looking him straight in the eye, and said, "Yes, you can disown me again if you want. It won't change anything." Vincenzo firmly took my hand, and we walked out of the hall. My father's words and curses followed us, but for the first time, I felt I had chosen my own path. 3 years later, when I reflected on that moment, I learned what had happened to my family. Amerigo, the same relative who always kept me updated on family matters, though I rarely asked, told me that Stewart Pharmaceuticals, my father's powerful company, had gone bankrupt. The house I grew up in had been sold at auction, and my parents had moved into an apartment, selling their luxury cars and jewelry in the process. When I heard about them, when my mother called me, I remembered that night when my father had called Vincenzo a gold digger. How ironic life's lessons can be. Life had shown me the true nature of those I had once thought of as my own. My husband, who had once been a poor immigrant, built an empire through honesty, hard work, and determination. Meanwhile, my family, whose wealth was rooted in pride and greed, had lost everything. If I had once believed that wealth was about money alone, I now understood that true wealth was something far more significant. It was the people who stand by you when times are tough, the ones who lift you up when the world tries to bring you down. And with that, I was the richest woman in the world.